Gen X versus Millennials in a state agency. Today I'm joined by Danielle Nash, who is the boss lady of Property Academy. Danny, thanks for joining me today. I want to talk about balancing the needs and expectations of different generations in a state agency. We've got young negs who are millennials or Gen Y or whatever they're called this week. Although I think I've just found out this morning there was one called Generation Alpha or something as well. I mean, scary. And then you've got Gen X like myself, and you've got the baby boomers. And the amount you must, at the Property Academy, you deal with lots of bosses, generally mostly Gen X's, but I'm sure there's a few older millennials in your future leaders groups as well, so you get to see both sides. What advice would you give about balancing the needs and expectations of different generations in a state agency?
I think the first thing is to avoid the stereotypes, because actually, if you think about it, the social scientists need those definitions for what they need it for, but they are also slightly bonkers, because I'm a millennial. I was born on February the 5th, 1981. I know. Thank you. There was too much of a pause there, Chris, but I barely look a day over 27. But the point is, I was born 5 weeks into the millennials, and so were people that were born in the year 2000. I mean, I'm old enough to be their mum, so it doesn't really make any sense. And I think we all default to stereotypes, which should really be avoided in the first instance. And I think it's also about having conversations, and the key to so many stuff is actually listening and understanding, isn't it? And it's understanding the different drivers, I think, behind each of those social demographics, and what each person has been through throughout their career that means that they react in the way that they do.
So being aware of how the other person thinks, and then you as the boss dealing with that, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so, but I think it's incumbent on the entire team. So I think for the youngest millennials, they need to understand the
Gen Yers, that now we've got they're the
Gen Z.
Gen Z, sorry.
Yeah, and I think my children are Gen A now.
Gen A, that's
yeah. So I think Gen Z is from 2000 to sort of nowish.
Right.
So they're obviously, some of them have been in the workforce for 6 years. So each group traditionally has its characteristics, but I don't think it's fair to tar each of those groups with the same brush necessarily.
So what you're saying is we as bosses need to be aware of our individual team members and don't pigeonhole people, but actually understand what makes them tick. And it's really hard for a Gen X person like myself to understand that. The way I was brought up is you get your head down and you work for someone for 5-10 years, whilst the younger ones think nothing of wanting to run the business after like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And being at a business for 2 years is like an awful long time. What advice would you give to the older generation first on how to deal with the younger ones, apart from listening to them? I mean, what's been your experience? And again, in the Property Academy, you get to talk to lots of forward-thinking bosses. How are they dealing with their younger negs and things like that? Because it isn't all avocado on toast, although I do love avocado on toast.
No, it's not. And it's not all working from home and things as well. I think it goes back to understanding. So it's looking at, how they've been brought up. So even in terms of how I was brought up, they probably weren't allowed to play out quite so much. So their ability to, and again, this is all really, really general, but the ability to understand risk is probably less than it was for us growing up in the late 80s, and then the kids that grew up in the 70s and stuff like that, because we were allowed to play out. They're not.
Yeah, my parents let you out at 9 o'clock, and as long as you were back for dusk, you were fine.
Yeah, and mine wasn't quite like that, but I would go and knock for my friends at 10, and I would never let my son do that now. It's ridiculous. So I think the key to all of it is to understand kind of what they're motivated by and why. There's a lot of anxiety around the fact that they're never going to own a home. So if you feel like you're never going to own a home, almost what's the point of trying? You don't need that safety in your career that we had if home owning is becoming, anecdotally or not, a bit of a dream.
And, a lot of bosses say they're, a lot of younger people are afraid of picking this up.
Yep.
Whilst to us, just common nature.
But that's, again, it's all about finding the middle ground, isn't it? So it's, you know, sometimes, so with the ones that don't really want to make phone calls, teaching them that sometimes that's a better way of doing it, and the ones that always want to make phone calls, that actually could that be communicated in a WhatsApp?
And isn't that interesting? Is that we've almost got, we as the older generation, their bosses, have almost got to fill in the gaps from their nature and nurture, from their cohort and the way they've been brought up by their families, and almost be pseudo parents to them and guide and support them.
I think so, exactly. And it's down to the you know, the younger people coming into the office as well to equally understand what drives cuts on some of the older employees. So you know, traditionally boomers don't really like change, but what's the flip side of that? The flip side is that they're consistent and they're loyal. So I think instead of actually, it's much easier, isn't it, on social media and everything else to look at the negative sides and be inflammatory. It's much harder to be considered and think, okay, well, that is traditionally the negative that is drawn out, but what's the flip side of it? So actually, you know, if you look at the younger ones that are coming through, yes, they don't tend to have longevity in their jobs as we would have done, but actually what that leads to is a lot of transferable skills and ability to land and just go. You know, you don't have to onboard them quite so quickly. They're digital natives, you know, they can do stuff on the internet and computers and social media that we've had to learn.
So in a nutshell, the older generation and the younger generation have to be respectful to each other, see where their skills and weaknesses are, listen to each other. And again, ultimately, the responsibility is on the bosses to ensure that their team work well and work within the parameters that you have, in a nutshell.
I think so.
Lovely. Thank you for your time today.